Okay. We are looking at the relationship between language and mental representation. We're still sort of working on mental representation itself, of course. And in our context, we want to remember why there's a metaphysical problem. What we've done in the class so far is we worked a bit on what metaphysics is and naturalism. And so we understand then that we are trying to work on a naturalistic description and explanation, a naturalistic semantics, if you will, of these psychological terms like belief, desire, hope, and fear, and so on. But what we want to look at are some problems with that, the metaphysical problems. 500 years ago, there was a problem. If you thought that your soul was a non-physical thing, how could a non-physical thing interact with the physical world? That was what the problem of mental causation looked like several centuries ago. But that doesn't mean that nowadays, when most of the educated community, if you want to call it that, I'm not sure what to call it, thinks that some kind of naturalism must be correct, and I'm with that community, right? Evolutionary biology and all that. But then there still are metaphysical problems that we need to look at, that we need to work on. What are these? They're conceptual problems, I think, linguistic ones, and they might be ones that we can make some progress on, but we have to understand what it is that we're looking at. So we're going to look then today at language and mental representation. And I'm not going to do anything fancy. Just there we are. Okay. So let's just get to it then. And I'll leave these up and talk through them so you get a chance to read them. So first of all, if we're thinking about mental representation, there's a general consensus that these must be formal representations rather than imagistic representations like little pictures. And there's a few different reasons for thinking that. Let me give you two, maybe the two main ones right now. The first bullet point, that formal symbols can generate enormous numbers of variants from a finite number of components. So we have 26 letters in our alphabet. There are many, many hundreds of thousands of words in our language. Later on, we'll talk about computers and what you can do if you can have enough groups of different numbers of zeros and ones. So that's one thing. You can have a finite number of units that can form a very, very large number of representations. And the second reason, the second bullet point there on the slide, is that they're more flexible in terms of emphasizing information and letting information out. So let's say that we're thinking about Leo Tolstoy's story, War and Peace. Think about the difference between writing a novel and filming a movie. If you're filming a movie, and what's the scene? The scene is that the Russian guerrilleros are riding down on the French soldiers' camp at dawn from the mountainside. All right. So if you're making a movie, you're going to have to decide, you're going to find the mountainside, you have to find out when the weather's right. You're going to have to figure out how many people are riding down and what are the horses that they're on. What kind of jackets do they have on? How many buttons on the tunic of that soldier on the left? All that kind of stuff. If you're thinking about the nervous system, for example, as having a warning, a danger warning function, among other things, obviously it's not going to put all that together. I mean, think of a tiger, okay? Now you're thinking of a tiger in your mind. Okay. Now, how many stripes does your imaginary tiger have? Well, probably you didn't think about the number of stripes of your imaginary tiger because you didn't have to. If you were making a movie, you'd have to get an actual tiger with an actual number of stripes. But if you're writing prose, you say, in the faint light of dawn, the Russian guerrilleros rode down on the sleeping French soldiers. And you let the reader fill in all of the details of that. So, so that's another major reason why, again, in cognitive psychology, the consensus is what we're looking. If we're looking at mental representation at all, we're looking at some kind of formal system like mathematics or like making words with the alphabet. Okay, so now there has been some in the 70s and 80s. There was what was called the imagery debate. There were some interesting experiments, and I'll give you some links to that. But in general, nowadays, most cognitive scientists think that mental representation is formal. And in fact, a lot of people, a more narrow definition of the phrase cognitive science is going to be the study, if you will, of what people might call the software, that is the grammatical or formal computational structure of thought. And that's really sort of what cognitive science is kind of about. Okay, so let me make sure I can click over to the next one. All right, so now behaviorists, and we're going to do a whole section on behaviorism because it's very important. Maybe I'm a little out of sequence here. Behaviorist psychology is an attempt to make psychology scientific by limiting it to observables. And just to keep it short here, that behaviors then are what we call tropic. What does that mean? Basically, in a sense, involuntary products of species evolution. People used to call a lot of behaviors instinctual. That's a word that I think, thankfully, has somewhat gone out of style now. And then, of course, as everyone knows about behaviorism, positive and negative reinforcement, the individual reinforcement history. And on this behavioristic view, then there isn't really any principal difference between the semantics of psychological descriptions of humans and non-human animals, and we'll get back to that. But Noam Chomsky wanted to challenge that in the 1950s. He was concerned that human beings not be brought under these behavioristic technologies. And Chomsky argued that humans have what you call a generative grammar. That is, that with the grammatical structure of human language, the ability to form propositions, we can form novel propositions, unique propositions. And also using recursion, that is sentences like I think I'm thinking about, I'm thinking about what I'm thinking about, thinking about, right? We can show that we can make potentially an infinite number. So the first thing to take away then, the technically from today, is what are intentional states? They are just beliefs, desires, hopes, fears, expectations, suspicions, intentions. And what characterizes these? That they are about something. My belief that Paris is the capital of France is about Paris, and it's about France. And that's the property, that property of aboutness is the property that we want to look at today. Again, we're looking at metaphysics, and we're looking for non-physical properties. Whenever we find one, we want to take a look at it and try and see what's going on, because we're looking at something that's philosophically interesting. Okay, so now then we're going to say that a belief, for example, is an attitude towards a proposition, and that intentional states, beliefs, desires, hopes, fears, and so on, are in general these propositional attitudes. So let's just take a basic subject-predicate sentence, X is Y, kind of sentence we say all the time. When we say, according to the propositional attitude model of intentional states, that someone believes that X is Y, we mean that they have a certain attitude towards that proposition, the attitude that it's true in that case. Basically, these maybe are all attitudes towards the truth or falsity of proposition. So a hope is the attitude that it would be good if it were true. And a desire is the attitude, roughly something like that we, all other things being equal, we might want to bring it about that it be true, that sort of thing. So the various intentional states are attitudes. A belief is a certain attitude. A fear is a different kind of attitude towards a proposition. The propositions are the content. And so this is the propositional attitude model of intentional states, which sounds like a mouthful, but it's really all around in the literature. So you should know these concepts and this way of talking, this jargon, and what it means. Propositional attitudes are a way of describing intentional states, which are just beliefs, desires, hopes, fears, and so on, and describing them in terms of their propositional content. All right, so as I said, we're doing our philosophy class, and we're looking around for metaphysical problems, and here we find the metaphysical problem of semantic properties. First bullet point. Any property that's not a physical property is a problem for naturalization. As I say, we've been working on what naturalization is the last couple of weeks, describing and explaining things in entirely physical terms. That's sort of the program or the goal. Of course, you don't have to agree with that program or goal, but we're looking at the philosophical problems that are generated if we assume that some sort of naturalization, some sort of naturalistic attitude towards the world is the right sort of metaphysical one. And then we start examining these concepts and words that we have from psychology and see that they're not obviously referring to physical things. The second bullet point, symbols don't have any physical properties. That needs more discussion. We'll talk about it more. It's a different claim than the claim that physical things don't have any semantic properties. For now, let's leave it at this, that each physical stop sign has its own physical properties. Each individual one, most of them are made out of, I guess, steel. I don't know. There's one made out of cardboard down the road here, actually. But stop signs can be made of anything you want. The symbol doesn't the symbol and having the meaning that the symbol has does not depend on the underlying physical thing. However, propositions, and what's the difference between a proposition and a sentence? The cat is on the mat. The cat is on the mat. I just said the same proposition twice. I had two sentences. Twice, I did a physical thing. I moved the air and said the cat is on the mat. I did it twice, so those are two different sentences. Think of it, if I did one skywriting with my airplane and wrote one on the chalkboard, I would have had two sentences. The cat is on the mat. There's only one proposition there. The proposition is not identical to the physical instantiations of the proposition. Imagine if no one wrote the cat is on the mat, it'd still be the proposition that it is. All right. So then just a minute, let me slow down now. Propositions and any symbols have semantic properties. What are semantic properties? They are, first of all, meaning that is referring to something, having truth values that just means being true or false, and bearing logical relationships. With what? With other propositions, like mathematical equations, for example. Physical things, including human beings and human nervous systems and physical processes happening in human nervous systems and brains, do not have semantic properties. They don't. I'm not about anything. My hand is not about anything. My brain is not about anything. You're not true or false. And your mom isn't true or false. And whatever other kinds of relationships we're in, spatiotemporal or otherwise, physical, for better or for worse, we're not in any logical relationships with each other. We're just not. So those are the semantic properties. They look like properties of linguistic objects. So if you have let me just emphasize this by stepping out from the slide. If you have a representational theory of mind, including a fairly technical sounding one, scientific sounding one, like you model the nervous system as an information processing device, for example. That's the way you're looking at it when you're doing your neurophysiology. And if you say that's irreducible, as there's no way to get the reference to the symbols, the language, the information to go away, then it looks like you have a dualist theory. It looks like it's not naturalized, because it looks like you're referring to properties, semantic properties, the kind of properties information has, that aren't physical properties. Maybe people care about that and maybe they don't, but we're doing metaphysics, and if that's the case, as long as you've got a representational theory of mind, you don't have a natural psychology. You just don't, and I think that's interesting. Okay, so that's the big problem, semantic properties. We're going to see that there are three kinds of properties besides physical properties, supposedly. I mean, if a good naturalist will say physical properties, the only kind of properties really that there are. But we're going to see that there are three nominal so-called properties in psychological talk that we're going to get at. And the first then that we're looking at there is semantic properties. And let me just show you one more problem here that I think is an important problem. I did my PhD dissertation on this, actually, on this topic. And that is the problem of animal minds, of the minds of non-linguistic animals. So, according to this cognitivist view of Chomsky and others, to have a belief or a desire, to be the kind of critter that has beliefs and desires, is you have to have language, because what a desire or belief or hope or a fear is just a certain type of attitude towards a particular proposition, some proposition or the other. And if that's right, then a non-linguistic animal like dogs or cats that can't form sentences, that don't have grammar, can't really be said to have beliefs or desires or hopes or fears at all. And let me step out to finish that up and explain that. So notice this. I mean, we've got an interesting theory there about mental representation, that mental representations that intentional states are propositional attitudes, attitudes towards the truth values of representations. But it has this odd consequence that it looks like non-linguistic animals can't be said to have beliefs or desires or any intentional states at all. Now, look, the boy and the dog are chasing the cat. They chase the cat across the lawn and they chase the cat up into the tree. And now the boy and the dog are down at the bottom of the tree and they're circling around the bottom of the tree and looking up into the tree like that. And you ask me, what are they doing? I say, well, they were chasing the cat. They wanted to catch the cat, and now they believe that the cat is up in the tree. Now, according to the cognitivist, who says that you have to be able to make sentences to really have any beliefs at all, I mean two different things. When I say that the boy believes that the cat is in the tree, I mean that the boy is in a certain attitude towards a well-formed proposition that forms the content of his mental representation. But if I say the dog believes that the cat is up in the tree, I must be saying something that must be speaking metaphorically, or I'm saying something else about the dog. I don't think that's right. In fact, I think that's false. The way I would put it is, it looks to me like the semantics of the psychological description. The boy believes the cat's in the tree. The dog believes the cat's in the tree. I think those are two different psychological descriptions, two different beings, the boy and the dog. It looks to me like they have the same semantics. When I say they believe that the cat is in the tree, I'm saying the same thing about both of them. That's what I think. So it looks like there's something wrong with someone who says, with the argument of someone who says that you've got to have language in order to have beliefs and desires. However, this argument is extremely important, and it really is extremely important, not just because it's influential, but because it's not an easy argument to get around. And so, so now we've completed the stuff that I want to review, and I think that should make the reading easier, and I'm going to get a little bit more specific. But anyway, the intentional attitude model of propositional states. Make sure you understand what that all means.